Hi, boys and girls. It's time for our story for this week, and our story is called The Coleman Lantern That Just Didn't Stop Burning. This story happened to my family. When my children were little, we lived in a big house way out in the country. It was actually a Victorian house with a big round tower on the top. They called it a cupola. Well, when we went to rent that house, we thought, oh, this would be a great place for us to live with our children. And when we went inside, right in the middle of the living room was an oil stove. And we were told that was the only heat for that whole house. Well, my husband got to thinking about that. We rented the house, and he got to thinking, it's going to cost an awful lot of money for all the oil to heat this house. And where we lived, we weren't too far. Well, it was probably a couple hours from woods where you could just go to the local rangers station and you could buy permits for a little bit of nothing to cut firewood. Well, my husband, instead of paying all the money to fill that big, huge tank outside, he went to town and he already had a chainsaw and he had all the equipment for cutting wood, but he went to the place where he worked, which at that time he was an assistant manager at a hardware store that was kind of a hardware, lumber, furniture store. And they sold wood-burning stoves. He bought a big, beautiful stove and brought it home, of course, with permission of the landlord. And he installed that big stove in our living room. So when winter came, we would have plenty of heat. It was so big that on cold winter nights, the door was so big you could take a big round piece of wood. And if you were strong enough to lift it, you could lift it up and you could just roll it on the hot coals from the fire burning all day. And it would sit in there and it would burn all night long. It took a lot of wood to keep that fire going. And so it was special outings for us. We would take our pickup and we would go up into the woods. And during those years when the kids were growing up, we had several different pickups. They were all used pickups. Well, my husband had recently got a brown pickup. We had gone up into the woods. In those days, the laws weren't as they are today. There weren't seatbelt laws. There weren't seatbelts in most of the vehicles. And so we could put all of our kids into the pickup and off we would go. And sometimes the kids would get to ride in the back. This time, we headed up to the woods in that pickup. We had our permits. We knew just where we could go to cut wood. And we got up in the woods. And I liked it when we went to cut wood. Those permits would let us cut down trees that were dead, or my husband would go along with his chainsaw and they'd be laying out on the ground and he would cut off the branches and our little boys would get a hold of the edges of those branches and they'd pull them all out of the way, and then he would start cutting that big trunk of that tree. And if there were big branches, he would cut those up into round pieces that we could take home and burn in that big stove. Well, the other thing that I especially liked to do was I had learned how to split wood. Now, I wasn't very good with just an axe because that requires a lot of oomph. But my husband had what they called a maul axe, which is a big, thick, heavy-headed axe. And I could take that and go crunch down on top of those big rounds of wood, and the wood would split apart. I would cut those pieces of wood into smaller pieces. And we always brought along our big red wheelbarrow. And between the kids and I, while my husband was cutting, we would put all those pieces of wood, if it was limbs that were just round pieces like this, the boys would put them into the wheelbarrow, and everything that I split up, they put those pieces into the wheelbarrow, and I would run that back to our pickup truck, and our pickup truck had sides on it that went up so we could get a lot of wood, and we'd throw all that into the back of the pickup, and then one of the boys would get up inside and he would stack it up. And when it got too high for him to reach, my husband would get in and he'd put those up so they were up high. Sometimes you want more than you should have, I guess. And I would get all excited because I wanted our woodshed at home to be full when winter came. And sometimes, because my husband and I both work, some years we didn't get to go get wood till late in the fall when it was getting cold, and sometimes it would snow. This time it wasn't snowing. I had a bad habit. When it was getting close time to go home, I always wanted a little more wood. And I'd go, "Oh, look, honey, there's another tree that's fallen. It's not really big. We wouldn't have to split it up. All you have to do is cut it. And the boys and I will get it in the back of the pickup." I did that often. And this night, both of us, my husband and I, looked up, and it was almost dark. Ooh. Now, where we went to get that wood was way up in the hills, up in the mountains. And the roads that you had to go on to get there went down and around curves and around trees, and sometimes, if you look down over the edge, way, way, way down there, there was like a creek running or a river running down there, and there was just an embankment that went down. Well, you really didn't want to be driving on that in the night, but it was almost dark. And we got in that pickup with that load of wood, and my husband cranked it up, and he reached out and he pulled out the little knob that turned on the lights, and oh my, there was no lights. None. We couldn't be driving on those little windy gravel roads going down a mountainside without any lights. So my husband got out and he looked under the hood. He looked at all the wires. He's good at fixing things, but he couldn't figure out what was wrong. There was just no lights. Well, while he had been under the hood, the kids and I had been praying, "God, you know that we have to have lights to get home." Now, I guess there was one good thing. We never went to the woods without all of our supplies. You know, we would take our tent with us. We took our lantern. We took plenty of food. We had lots of bedding. But we needed to work the next morning, both my husband and I. We needed to get home. And we were all very tired. We had worked really hard, and we had a full load on that pickup. My husband came back to the cab and he said, "I don't know. I can't see anything under there that's wrong." And then he stood there and he looked and he thought, what else can we do? Then he remembered in that box of supplies was our Coleman lantern. Now I'm going to show you a picture of a Coleman lantern, but still to this day they're green and they are a lantern that burns on kerosene. On the bottom, there is a little round metal tub with a little silver knob on it that you open and you fill it full of kerosene. And hooked on top of that is a little silver thing with a wick that comes out of the center of it. And if you light that wick, it burns the kerosene out of that little pot in the bottom. And then on top of it, it has a round glass so that the light will shine all the way out around. And it has a big handle that goes on the top. My husband said, I wonder. He went and he got that kerosene lamp out and he took some wire and he wired it to the front of that pickup. It just hung there. Now we had no idea how long it would burn. And I don't think that we had any extra kerosene with us. We all got back in that pickup. My husband said, I can see a little ways in front of me. And so slowly we started making our way with him driving down those curves between the trees, past those big drop-off embankments, on down that gravel road. And when we got to the next road, my husband looked at me and he said, it's still burning. I can still see a little ways ahead of me. And so we continued on. We couldn't believe it was still burning. How long could a kerosene lamp burn? Well, we came to the end of that gravel road, which went into another road. And we kept going and going and going. And finally, we got to the bottom of the mountain. And my husband said, you know, it's not very safe to go on the big main roads without any lights. People can't see us from behind. It's still shining brightly in front of us. It has to be God. Well, he took the old roads home. Yes, it took us longer. We went round and round on all these little old roads that joined together to get to where we lived out in the country. We couldn't believe it. Something was keeping that lantern burning. It burnt, and it burned, and it burned, and it kept sending out its little light. And as we would go around corners, it would swing, so the light would kind of shoot out to the sides, and it just kept burning. We were all amazed. How can this be? Well, we knew we couldn't get home without that light. It had been a long, long time already, but it just kept burning. Finally, we got to the road that adjoined to the road that we lived off of. And we started down that road. The light was still burning. What could we say? And pretty soon, we could see our house ahead. That big old Victorian house was sitting there waiting for us. And we went down the hill and around, and we got on our driveway. And just as soon as we got on our driveway, boys and girls, do you know what happened? When we were safe at home, the light went out. We sat back and thought, all this way, God had kept that light burning just to get us home safely. Don't tell me that God doesn't care about you and me, because boys and girls, He does. That lantern, we still have it. That lantern will still burn if we put kerosene in it. But never did it burn like it did that night, all the way down that steep mountainside, all the way down those gravel roads, around those curves, around the trees, past the embankments. For hours it burned. And when we got home and my husband looked in that little container that hooks at the bottom of that Coleman light, there wasn't even a whiff of kerosene left in that container. How long that had been burning with it empty, I don't know. Or did God just keep that kerosene going until we got home and didn't need it, and it was burnt dry? God is so good to us. And you remember, boys and girls, if for some reason you think that God isn't there for you, you remember the Coleman lantern that just kept burning. Thank you, boys and girls, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.